All right. Welcome back to the Bees Like That podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris, and today I have an esteemed and honored guest, the great, powerful David Hunter, here to talk a little bit of a mess and possibly some constructive conversation. We'll see how this goes. David, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. Nice to
Good.
see you again.
Good. Always great to see you. So, like I explained, we met a little bit before we started the official meeting or podcast, and just kind of explained that I didn't necessarily write down any questions or have any topics in particular that I wanted to talk about. In part because I wanted to um, again free up some space for you, like if there are any things that you would like to talk about, topics that are like pressing in your mind, but also just free up some space and availability to just kind of free form the conversation.
Yeah, so and before this started, you indicated you want to talk about, among other things, dependencies.
Hmm.
And of course, dependencies are where we do our work. And within dependencies, again, as is painfully clear to you, dependencies uh, have a terrific impact on um, Black communities and uh, Native communities.
Hmm.
Um, and so it may be that when we talk about when you and I talk about dependencies, and we're talking to this huge crowd out there, um, uh, uh, probably a lot of them don't even know what that means. Don't know what a dependency is or why
Sure,
we're talking about it. So we probably should start, to the extent that we're going to talk about dependencies, among other things.
sure,
Uh, we ought to clarify what that is, and you can do that. I can do that. We can both.
sure. I can start it off for sure, and
Yeah.
then anything that I miss or anything that you'd like to add, you can feel free to interrupt and kind of augment the definition. But so I've talked about it a bit before on the podcast, but I think you're right that it does there's some value in defining it for this conversation. So what a dependency is essentially, and I apologize if this is a crude version of the definition, but um, any parent or parents who've come under the radar or otherwise watchful prying eyes of the state via Department of Children, Youth and Families, DCYF, formerly known as CPS. I think there still might be a part of DCYF that's labeled CPS. Anyway, so what will happen is they'll get these calls, concerned citizens or mandated reporters, however, police reports, whatever, doctors will get will I guess make a call to DCYF. They'll determine whether or not it warrants an investigation. And if they do, then they'll send out an investigator or investigators. They'll do their job, submit to the department whatever their findings are. From there, if the department believes that, the allegations or other bits of information are credible and warrant removal or at least further steps, then they will do what do they always have to do a PC to remove children after an investigation?
Yes, to remove children, not to do
Yeah,
the investigation.
gotcha. So in the case that they do remove children, then it will go to shelter care. You'll have an initial shelter care hearing, right? And then however that goes, sometimes shelter care can go on for, I don't want to say indeterminate amounts of time, but I've seen people in shelter care for a while. I think it's what is 75 days is the limit.
Well, it can be extended. I
Okay.
mean, I've had clients in shelter cares for months.
Yeah. So hypothetically, then, if the situation is that shelter care is appropriate, and then they find that the children are dependent, which means that neither parent at that time is able to safely and adequately care for their children due to certain deficiencies. However, those are defined by the state. The judge will sign the order and the kids will be placed out of home and the dependency process starts. Um, I think the rough timeline is about 18 months, but within there's some other parameters. I don't know if you want to take over and kind of define some of those.
Well, so I think, first of all, when you and I talk about dependencies and try and explain them, we sort of assume that people understand some of the underlying things that people who never are touched by dependencies aren't aware of. So
Sure.
initially, and I think Chris made this clear, when we talk about allegations, we're talking about allegations of neglect or abuse of children.
Yeah.
Or abandonment, or just that parents don't seem to be able to safely care for their children.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what generates a CPS investigation. And then
sometimes, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt you. Sometimes I think it's important to include this part because the I guess I don't know, the neglect could be neglecting to keep children safe or not expose them to domestic violence as DCYF defines it. So I guess sometimes the kids themselves, right, don't even have to actually have been abused, like literally physically abused or starved or any of those
Right.
things. If mom and dad suffer from active substance use disorder and are violent to one another, that I've also seen kids be removed for that too.
And that's the distinction between neglect and abuse.
Yeah.
Even abuse certainly does not require evidence of, from the state's perspective, does not require evidence of physical abuse. Maybe mental abuse of certain kinds, maybe, psychological problems.
Sure.
And of course, if parents are suffering from mental health issues or substance abuse issues, which in in people who we generally represent get the attention of the state, some friend or neighbor or mandated reporter. Incidentally, mandated reporter includes people like social workers,
Yeah.
counselors, doctors, teachers, I think, a lot of times hospitals. When any one of those is obligated to make a report, goes to what we call Child Protective Services or CPS, and they do an investigation. And that's where the state becomes involved. And then we get to, are they going to make a finding? Are they going to decide that there is a reason to be concerned or there isn't?
Yeah.
And a lot of these reports come in and they don't go anywhere. Although they go someplace a lot more often if the parents who are being investigated are of certain communities, Black communities, Native American communities, Hispanic communities.
Yeah.
All of those groups, those communities within our larger community are far more affected and far more involved in dependency matters than are people like myself, white middle class people. So that, I think, hopefully you and I together have managed to cobble together an explanation about what dependencies are and allows us then to go forward. And I think what we want to talk about, at least primarily this time, is what we see happening in dependencies and why we have the concerns we do. And that may lead us to talk about something that you and I are involved in right now, which has to do with. So there are various participants in dependencies. There are social workers, there are lawyers, um, there are things called guardians ad litem. And all of those parties, or I say parties for the moment, have an impact on what happens in dependencies and what happens to our clients.
Sure.
And so we can start by talking about it may be, Chris, that you want to spend some time talking about GALs because that's something that's kind of a high priority for us as we're proceeding in dependencies. And it's kind of a point of a lot of contention.
Sure.
Within dependencies, statewide, actually, nationally. So I don't know. You may want to start by talking about what all of that's about.
Sure. So since we're on the train of definitions, I think that it's good to explain for the audience because I don't talk about this part of it that much on my podcast and other episodes. So guardians ad litem and the CASA there's paid and there's volunteer versions of these roles. Or wait, so is it the CASAs that are volunteer or not the GALs? Are there GAL volunteers or is it just the CASAs?
So there are two kinds of GALs, or volunteer GALs, and they are essentially CASAs,
okay, so
board-appointed special advocates, and then they're compensated GALs.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to double check. So that the program, and this is again a short and probably crude version of the history of this program, but essentially what it boiled down to is a judge, I don't know how many years ago, determined that they needed some additional assistance with gathering information and understanding the communities or the parents from which these children and families from which these children have been removed that he was dealing with. So in this judge's mind, what a reasonable and rational action would be was to send one of their peers or someone that they know from their community out into these communities where families are being separated from their children via state intervention and do their own independent investigation and assess what it is exactly about these families that creates, or if there in fact is any imminent harm being posed to the children, should they remain in care, or if they were to be removed and placed in temporary shelter. So from the inception, this is problematic because if you have then what we have or see now, which are programs, CASA and GAL programs, which are primarily, at least in Washington, in the counties that we work, comprised of middle-aged white women, most of which I don't know exactly what kind of training they get, but my suspicion is that it's not the requisite training to be at least culturally competent going into these different communities. I'd say largely we serve more than any other BIPOC communities, Indigenous families who have been impacted by the child welfare system. So I can just use that as an example. And I want to say too that it in my mind doesn't add a tremendous amount of value to experience if a person who is white has experience working with Indigenous families, if the proper and requisite training to be culturally competent and sensitive to the needs and issues of these communities is not in place or hasn't been in place. And so far as I understand, and I could be totally speaking out of my rear end here, but I don't have an understanding that these kinds of trainings are implemented. And if in fact they are, they're not implemented on a frequent enough basis to have these volunteers or paid guardians ad litem equipped with the skills to fully understand how Indigenous populations parent, what their lifestyles are typically like and what it looks like, and the rhythm, the culture, and the heartbeat of these different communities that they serve or that they're tasked to serve. And in their mind, protect children from these communities. Um, I think that it's valuable to note also that at least from my experience, what I see is there, from at least the GAL side, that there's emphasis placed on valuing the placement, particularly foster parent placement, um, how they view the relationship between parent and child, what their input is on how the children are doing since being placed in foster care, and what's best for them moving forward. Rarely do or have I seen um, overwhelmingly, or even well, it's been pretty underwhelming, the representation of GALs who are for parents' advocacy and rights rather than foster parents.
Yeah. So uh, probably it would be helpful to kind of take a closer look at what the GAL system uh, is supposed to address and what it does and doesn't address. You're right, of course, that this started in the 80s with a judge down in King County who said to himself, I'm getting these reports from the department, that is the state, DCYF, um, and, I'm having the parents' attorneys represent the parents and I'm getting stuff from them. And it's hard for me to know really. All I hear is what happens in court, and I don't know what to believe. And it would be helpful to have some people who are independent of all of that to just give me reports, public, not private, but provide a report at various times during the process so that I can get an idea of what, and they use this phrase, what the best interest of the child is.
Right.
So we've when I say we, I'm talking about parents' attorneys and parents' social workers, as opposed to the social workers who work for the department or the GALs. We've kind of taken up the task of challenging the efficacy, the usefulness of having those best interest reports made, partly because they don't get the communities at all that you and I represent, and even if they do, and it should be clear that there are plenty of perfectly decent, thoughtful people who are GALs.
Of course.
And are interested in doing the best they can for the children and the parents.
Of course.
So I've been, wrestling around with GAL issues for, I don't know, 4 years with a fair amount of success. But more recently, I think you and I began to think about, does it really help if we get more training for them? Probably would. But what is the point in having them involved and intervening on behalf of children at all in dependencies? Why have them?
Sure.
What do they add that a DCYF social worker can't provide?
Yeah.
Because after all, that's the responsibility of the paid, trained social workers in the department, is to try and figure out what's best for the child. And at the same time, what's best for the parents.
Sure.
As they're working with it.
I like all of what you said there, but particularly I like that you've highlighted what I guess we could call a redundancy in the system. Um, because I've heard that said before. I've heard it said by you before, and I've heard it said by other people before that let's let's take a closer look at the actual need and necessity of a program like this when we have paid state workers who are tasked with completing all of the same work. And again, this is my assumption that it's primarily most of the same work because when I look at the GAO reports and I look at the department social worker reports, they're virtually identical a lot of the time. It's a lot of the same information, and you can safely, I mean, I do read them all, but if one were pressed for time, you could safely assume that one to the other was going to be the same in comparison. You didn't necessarily need to read both, but it's smart too. Um, but to say that I think it's redundant to have two people do the same work, then you would hear the question thrown, well, that creates an undue burden and stress on the department social worker and creates more work for them. But I don't know how much of that is necessarily true. I mean, I can't say with 100% confidence there would be no additional work that the state social worker or department social worker rather wouldn't need to do. But just on its face, it seems that it's the same work. So there's a redundancy there. And in my mind, again, this is no personal or moral failing or judgment on any CASA program in particular, but the weight in court that is given to essentially the same information presented by the CASA and the state's social worker is tremendous. And it is sometimes incredibly difficult to overcome.
Yep. Yep. And of course, because the GALs are ostensibly independent, they don't have any particular interest. They're not driving, a department desire to, get children someplace safe and convince the court of what that needs to be like. And so there's a kind of presumption on the court's part that these are just interested people, independent. They don't have any investment, as if that were a good thing, in what happens. They just want what's, quote, in the best interest of the children. And of course, that touches on the fundamental issue that we're wrestling with now with regard to GALs. And I want to say again, I think it is necessary, and we've been struggling with this for some time. We would like for the GALs and the social workers and the attorneys and everybody who's involved in dependency actions to understand this has nothing to do with the character of the people involved.
Sure.
It has nothing to do with whether we think they're have an interest in. They don't have any vested interest in the outcome. The GALs don't.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting problem.
Yeah.
And that takes us to the sort of heart of what we're wrestling with right now.
Yeah.
And that is a legal issue. What does it mean for a party in any court action to have what is called standing? Mm-hmm. What does it mean for a person to be able to bring a suit against another person or a corporation bring an action against a person or a corporation or the state? What does it mean for them? Well, it means they have something they want, something that affects them. They've been, in their opinion, deprived of something. And then the other party they're going after is a party who also has a stake in it. They want to keep what they've gotten. They want to protect their own situation. how does a guardian ad litem fit into that context?
Mm.
What stake do they have in the outcome of the case? What's seen as a benefit creates a significant legal issue.
Sure.
They have nothing at stake. They don't have children. Their children aren't in the dependencies. They don't stand to win or lose any money, depending on the outcome. Their children are not going to be removed from them. Their children are not going to be reunited with them. They have no interest in the case itself, except, gee, we want to be nice and help kids.
Yeah.
Kids generally, not their
Yeah.
kids,
Sure.
kids. And that's what we're wrestling with today. That is now.
So I have to apologize ahead of this question, but couldn't an argument be made, and again, if I'm naive in this, I apologize, but couldn't an argument be made, or has it been made, in fact, that even in light of no independent or respective incentive or standing, couldn't the argument be that I'm the proxy for this child and their interests? So thereby I'm stepping in here in this position. And then once the child's best interest and safety are secured, then I'm no longer a proxy or a party to this proceeding or this matter, right? Because I don't know, like that just like occurred to me as a possible argument for that.
Well, so the question of a proxy on behalf of the child is an interesting concept in dependency actions, because of course there is already a quote proxy for the child in dependency action, and that's the parents.
Gotcha.
And the parents are there because they want their child back. They want what's in the best interest of the child. And the guardian ad litem adds nothing to that, and in fact, in some ways separates, alienates the parents from their children.
Sure.
And presumes that they know best what's in the interest of the children. They know better than the parents do.
Right. So
legal systems in America have always operated on the principle that, as I said before, you have a cause of action. You have somebody who's bringing something in court against somebody else because they've taken something, they've deprived something from them they've been deprived by somebody else, and the other people have an interest in keeping it.
Sure.
And again, the guardian ad litem doesn't have what we call standing. Gotcha. In my opinion, doesn't have standing in the case. So, and that's a really ancient American principle in the law. The United States Supreme Court has reiterated that issue many, many times. You have to have standing. You can't just be some independent person stepping in and saying, gee, I'm interested in this case. I want to have my opinion heard.
Sure.
You've got to have something at stake. And the GALs have nothing at stake. They any more than the rest of us do. I don't have any interest in what happens in a dependency action, except that I'm obligated to represent the parents. It's sure. The parents who have an interest. It's the state who has an interest. It's not the GAL. So, and incidentally, the Washington State Supreme Court has also addressed the standing issue many, many times. And it's always been the same. You don't get to go into court and argue about things that other people have brought unless you have a real interest in the outcome.
Gotcha.
And that's where we are today. That's what we're going to be proceeding with in court. Hopefully we'll get this up to the Washington State Supreme Court. That's
Sure.
what we'd like.
So far, I think maybe we should include or talk briefly about that part of it as far as your experience the last 4 years and what's happened, the ruling that you got, and where that all stands right now. Um, I know you're probably loath to talk about it after like the 100 millionth time. But possibly even just like the short version, if such a version exists, so people understand because we kind of went from one part of it to like where we're at with the Supreme Court. So it might be helpful that people understand what took place in the middle.
Well, several years ago, I started challenging, well, all of us started challenging the right of GALs, certain kinds of GALs, to be appointed in dependency actions. And when I first started, it had to do with compensated GALs because there was a statute, Washington State statute, that addressed a requirement that if you're going to appoint a compensated GAL in a case in larger counties in the state of Washington, you had to set up a registry of who those compensated GALs were going to be. And when a dependency was started and you were going to appoint a compensated GAL, you had to provide a strike list to the parties so they could strike one. And the courts, who are generally responsible, the Whatcom County Superior Court in this case, are responsible for appointing the GALs, did that and have for many years done that without providing a strike list. So initially, about 4 years ago, I started arguing with the court. After a while, we just decided that Whatcom County Superior Court, had their own interest in the case, and so shouldn't be making decisions about what should happen to the case. So, and they didn't argue about that. They recused themselves, and we had to go down to Skagit County and have hearings down there on whether I was right. And back in 23, I got a decision from a Skagit County Superior Court judge that they were required to provide a strike list. Then there were further back and forth between the Whatcom County Superior Court and myself and about that. And then we had another hearing. And then in about a year later, in the spring or maybe the middle of this year, got another decision by the Skagit County Superior Court judge that they did have to provide a strike list. And that's essentially where it stands right now. There's still some litigation going on about it, but that's fundamentally what it is. That probably doesn't make much sense to people who are familiar with all that legal argument and the statutes. So that's what, and it was while I was in the latter part of that litigation, I came to realize thanks to a law review article I'd read, that I really was arguing something that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because there was always going to be a GAL. Sometimes it'd be compensated, sometimes it wouldn't. We wouldn't be allowed to strike a GAL, if compensated GAL, if we didn't like her. I say her because they're almost all women, almost all white women.
Mm-hmm.
But there's going to be some GAL, and I began to think, why do we have GALs at all? And so that takes us to where we are now.
Gotcha. So I think I want to say this too before we move forward, is a bit of a way to preface whatever may follow in the conversation about this. And I hope that people take this in the spirit in which it's intended, and what it's not intended to do is personally malign, criticize, or judge people. Because as you pointed out, and as I recognize, they're wholesome, good-hearted, good-natured, kind, great people that work in these programs. However, the issue in my mind doesn't lie in that population of people who make up this program. The issue for me, and you, of course, or otherwise you see this, of course, among the other issues, or otherwise it's doubtful that you'd be so convicted about this issue, is that we have to consider like the potential harm to families. And it's not manufactured risk. It's not speculation. It's not conjecture. We've seen these things play out in real time with the really egregious offenses that took place in Snohomish County, as outlined in that article that we read, however kindly intentioned. Um, the focus in my mind shouldn't be how the larger issue makes individual GALs feel who happen to be good people and perhaps probably even pretty good at their job, not vicious, not vindictive. They don't, they don't have it out for parents. They don't have it out for, Indigenous parents or BIPOC parents. The focus should be on the harms that have fallen, do befall, and continue to impact these populations, like these BIPOC families. That's the thing that in my mind should be focused on when these conversations come up, because you know as well as I do, like the fight that you started a few years ago, along with a presentation that you and I recently did at one of our conferences. People have some really big feelings about the positions um, and are worried that this conversation historically and moving forward has been one that's been generated to attack a certain demographic of people or individuals specifically. And I would feel irresponsible in this moment if I didn't loudly and publicly say that that is not the case. Um, the case in my mind for me has always been and will remain the care and prevention of harm that has impacted families historically, currently does, and potentially could in the future, because the implications for that are incredible. You don't get these things back. You don't get to say, oh, well, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. Let's just do over and move past it. No, these people and their families have been altered and changed irreparably for life. So, and that's not an over dramatization. These things are real and people are hurt by parts of these systems every single day. You see it, I see it. But I wanted to say that before we move forward with that.
Yeah. And I think I'm not sure we're going to be able to convince people of that, but
Yeah.
that really is the situation. We just, and there's a good deal of statistics. This isn't just, a feeling. It's just not, we've seen this happen in this case and that case, and we see it happen in our cases. And so we make presumptions about it, as is laid out in significant detail in this law review article that we're talking about,
Sure.
however well intentioned. It it has statistically profound impact on Black, Native, Hispanic communities, parents and children whose lives have been badly impacted, regardless of how the dependency turns out.
Mm-hmm.
The fear and anxiety and really terror that parents feel, and that all of us would feel if we saw our kids being taken away from us by the state,
Sure.
is hard to imagine. And even if everything turns out all right, that's there for the children and for the parents. So we can't solve the whole dependency system right now, and it certainly needs a lot of careful consideration, whether it needs to exist at all, and if so, to do what. So really, what we're trying to do now is just a small part of a larger question about dependencies, and that is, how do we begin to reduce the impact these dependencies have on these communities that we're talking about? So,
And
GALs first.
obviously, like I think it's clear to me, you, and everybody else under the sun that, like you say, there's needs to be closer examination, right, of the program, its existence moving forward, et cetera. But you and I don't get to make those determinations. So in the meantime, what's the reality? The reality is these programs are going to continue. These people are going to continue to function in these roles, interact with families. Not all, but a percentage of families are going to continue to be harmed by these programs. So way forward in my mind, and this isn't, I don't know, like you could make fun of me and say it's like a utopian view of this, but I think it's realistic from just the human aspect that professionally and humanly we could come together as people and just say, hey, listen, um, professional ideologies and politics and opinions and convictions aside, the heart of the issue is here, these families, and how then right now in this moment can we all come together and work together for the same goal because we espouse the same goals outwardly, but I don't know necessarily sometimes that inwardly these things are held in the same regard universally by all of us. And I can't or won't presume to know who or why that might be. Um, but I have to believe that in all of us, there's more good that exists than bad. So there has to be a way forward in the meantime, because we have to continue to work together in these spaces and make these things as equitable and just as possible. So how do you see that playing out moving forward? Are you optimistic about this kind of collaboration between, sides of the table, defense and the state side regarding these issues?
Well, I guess I would say that after the years, I don't want to say how many years of wrestling around with these issues of race and class and all of that sort of thing, I I remain somewhat discouraged,
Mm,
particularly as a result of the most recent stuff that's happened in the United States.
yeah.
That we are making progress. I guess I feel like we may have made some progress in the area of race and how that's addressed, but uh, I can't say I'm optimistic. I guess hopeful is the best I can say. And I feel the same way about dependencies. It's a more closed community. So all of us, at least here in Whatcom County, are closer in proximity to one another. We have more contact day to day with one another. I hope that we can find a way for us to talk about these issues. I would, I'm sure they don't believe this, but I would be delighted to be able to sit down with GALs and say, look, I want to make sure you understand what's going on here. This has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It's not an attack on you personally. It's not even an attack on necessarily your competence, although I will point out that there's no particular requirement of any qualifications
Right.
to be a guardian ad litem. I'm not even sure that you're required to even have a high school diploma.
Yeah.
Not that that necessarily proves anything, but you could, let's say you have a degree in architecture.
Right.
That doesn't
Right.
necessarily qualify you to work
Yeah.
in dependencies, but
Sure.
it allows you to be a guardian ad litem. In any case, we need to find ways to talk about that.
Yeah.
I'd be delighted to have an opportunity to talk to GALs about it and see if we can figure out. I guess it's fair to say that I would like to be able to convince them that I'm talking to you, GALs, convince you that this doesn't work for parents. It doesn't work for children. However much you want to help children, you're not helping them. And you're not helping the system. There are probably lots of ways that you can do that outside the system. You can help to provide resources for children and families, for parents. And that's badly needed, especially in the impoverished communities that you and I, Chris, deal with all the time.
Yeah, every day.
Everybody we represent is poor.
Yeah.
By definition,
Yeah.
by legal definition.
And that's just the broad definition. Under that umbrella too, there's like abject poverty sometimes for some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love for that to happen. Am I optimistic? My recent experience suggests that there's not much interest in talking to me at all, or you. Well, I don't know about you. You're so much nicer than I am.
There's no reason for you to sit up here telling lies, man.
Well,
no, I don't know. I think, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of childish optimism, but I feel like, man, like I say, I have to believe that exists more good in people than bad. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do this work. And I've seen, I'm sure you've seen too, that time typically it will soften hearts, and sometimes down the road, there's an opportunity for a conversation. Maybe someone's having a really good day or maybe a really bad day or whatever. I don't know. In my heart, I believe that there's a pathway forward, but I think that just getting to the table is super important because the conversation about them and their role is just but a small part of it in my mind, right? Because there's so much other stuff underneath that needs to be unpacked. In particular, I can think of what I usually would call like the big three, which are domestic violence allegations, mental health issues. Like, I don't know why that happens on my Zoom, but every once in a while it'll just start doing a thumbs up symbol and I don't even hit that reaction button. But like mental health issues and substance use disorder issues. In particular for dads, the big hang up is like the DV issue. And I don't know exactly where I want to start with this, but I guess I'll start with one of the initial problems overall that I see is like the actual like Washington state law definition of what domestic violence is doesn't always or equally match what the department posits in the petitions as domestic violence, and which then prompts them to provide collateral to potential assessors before a domestic violence or anger management assessment, which in my mind, I can't get around any version of reality where that doesn't create a pre-existing bias before they even meet the parent or person that they're going to evaluate. It's impossible. There's no way that you're ever going to get, you could probably pay me to say that I agree with, but like, there's no way in my mind that that's realistic. So just getting over like these three big things, the DV, the mental health issues, or the assumed mental health issues, all three assumed DV, mental health, and substance use disorder. I think the substance use disorder stuff is probably generally more readily apparent because you have like physical cues and other things that if you're experienced with substance use disorder, you can kind of identify. But again, circling back to the DV thing, if you don't even from the beginning have a correct definition of what domestic violence actually is, you can't then move forward with um, proposals for services or evaluations otherwise for an issue that's been misdiagnosed or misidentified from the beginning. So just listing those as examples of things that would need to, like, under the myriad of things that need to be addressed after just getting people to the table to talk.
So, and of course, what you're really talking about there is goes back to what we were saying before. This got to be really boring for anybody who's still listening. But anyway, there's something about the dependency system generally that doesn't work very well. So all of those issues, DV, mental health issues, substance use, um, starts from a premise that if any of those are present, it means that children are unsafe.
Sure.
Children need to be potentially removed.
Sure.
And although our own dependency system here in Washington has undergone some changes over the last few years to be a little more thoughtful about whether those problems necessarily present a need to attend to the issue or remove children from parents.
Right.
There is the presumption that, if DV exists, kids are in danger. If kids have been abused, kids need to be removed.
Sure.
When, of course, in a more global sense, what we ought to be doing, and this is, we might as well shrug our shoulders and move on. It requires our attendance to the whole issue of poverty and homelessness and race and all of the huge issues in America and globally that don't seem to get attended to while we're wrestling around about whether we should have computers or not.
Sure. Well, I think one of the reasons for that is, like, especially when we're talking about DV, is it's something that I think is easy to land on what we feel would be the right side of the issue on, right? Nobody that I know, reasonable person of sound mind and body, has ever voiced to me that, yeah, I feel like I should have the right to abuse my partner, male or female. No rational person that I know, right?
Or children.
Right, or children, right? So that part, just overcoming that obstacle is tough. I'm gonna tell you why DV is a really important issue for me, and also why it's an important issue for me regarding dependencies, and one of the reasons why, like, I really advocate for definitions being changed and approaches being changed. Like, I have an extensive and lifelong history with violence and domestic violence. Like, it started for me when I was a kid. And I mean, I'm talking about, I won't go into like graphic detail, but I've been sexually assaulted. I've been beaten severely, shamed publicly, and all of these things happened to me by an adult before I was even of the age of 7. I used to wet the bed when I was a kid, and the way that my stepmother would remedy that, or her attempts to remedy that, she thought first that she could publicly ridicule me out of this, what she thought was a bad habit or a lazy habit. So in front of people, she would make fun of me for it, tell anybody that would listen that I was a bedwetter. She would even go as far as to actually literally keeping me in my soiled clothing and then point that out to people. Like, I make him sit in that all day just as a reminder that he needs to get up and go to the bathroom. I was made to do weird things like eat on the floor on a paper sack while my stepmom and her daughter would eat at a table. I would have to wait for them to finish whatever food they were eating before I could begin eating. So that meant I would have to sit on the floor and watch them eat while they took their time and just kind of scratched at their plates. And then I would either get what was left over from their plates or what was left over in the kitchen. It was rarely that she would make enough for all three of us to have. And as I grew up, obviously, these experiences had a tremendous impact and really informed my decisions and the way that I approach relationships, especially romantic relationships. A lot of them are really unhealthy. And I would say first that out of any of this, what I don't want people to hear is that I've never been abusive to people or any of the partners that I've been with. Because certainly I have. I've my I have a really like crappy ability to be extremely caustic and just really venomous with my words towards people. And I've definitely hurt people doing that. I've been unfaithful. I've stolen from people. I've ghosted people, run off, and done all kinds of really abhorrent and terrible things to people in relationships. And I would say that also in every single one of those relationships, I've been physically abused by my partners. Every single one of them. Every single one. Now, justifying back and forth either or abuse to on either side, absolutely not. I just wanted to highlight this stuff so that people understand, you and anyone else that knows me, why I have such a strong conviction and position on this issue. Because I've also been wrongly arrested and convicted and had to go to jail for domestic violence that I did not commit. So when I see that these allegations and these things that are posited and delivered as fact in these petitions about dads or moms or whoever we generally see it about dads being perpetrators of domestic violence and that they are a threat to their children, et cetera, et cetera. I always have to ask, based on what evidence? Are you saying that going into this as an investigator, you have two people with, notwithstanding whatever's on board, be it mental health, substance use, anxiety, whatever, given now this added pressure of being investigated by an official who works for the state? Realistically, moving forward, is anyone ever surprised that one parent or both to the other is going to point the finger and say, yeah, they're actually the one that abused me? Because faced with the proposition, agree, even just agree or let things stand and don't challenge these allegations as they are, potentially get my kids back. How often do you think a parent, male or female, is going to be the one to die on their sword and be noble and say, no, that's not true, I actually did that from the get-go? Not, I would say not very many. So why have I said all this? I think that it is an imperative of the tallest order that appropriate training, like training needs to be updated, because the stuff that we have now goes back to dates back to the 70s and hasn't changed since almost the inception of the feminist movement. I mean, there's been changes made, certainly, for sure, and I mean to policy and approach, but overall, the idea that this is an black and white gendered issue is just simply not true. Is not true. We have the partner abuse thing. It's called PASC. I can't remember. I'm terrible with remembering each of the names in the acronyms, but it is the largest body of study and curation of any and all data relating to DV, and it's not biased, in the world in the last 30 years. And how it's not talked about by more people who are extremely close to this issue continues to baffle me, because it includes FBI, CDC, World Health Organization statistics and study that date back to the 70s. And none of it ever in any one of those studies suggests that this is a gendered issue. In fact, what the data does show and point to is that the true definition of DV, as it's defined, um, shows that the most common form is mutually escalated violence, meaning people are crappy to each other. And what that usually looks like is I call you names, you call me names, I scream at you, maybe I throw a remote and it breaks on the wall, I storm off, slam a door, we fight, make up, maybe shove each other, no one gets seriously hurt. That is the most common form of domestic violence. And it fits more closely with the actual definition of domestic violence, not the abuse and battery that is more closely connected to things like coercive control, um, no bodily autonomy, controlling finances, sex in the relationship, severe physical, mental, and psychological abuse, etc. Because where we're at right now, the way that things stand with regard to this issue in dependencies, it seems like a narrative is ushered in. It may be litigated back and forth, maybe even like heatedly, but ultimately in the end, the state's recommendation universe or generally always wins. And dads who in fact may be innocent of domestic violence end up having to have that on their record now, not maybe officially, but within their dependency, and they continue to have to fight that throughout the life of the dependency and have to go through these services. And it takes a psychological toll on people to be repeatedly told that you're a thing that you know in your heart that you're not.
So, uh, first of all, let me say that I'm a perfect example of a person who operated for years and still does on the presumption that predominantly uh, physical abuse comes from men and towards women. Um, and I think I've operated on that assumption because men are stronger.
Sure.
By and large, men are just stronger and bigger. Mm-hmm. So that even if it's mutual, the fact is it's way more harmful to women than it is to men,
sure.
By and large.
Sure.
And over time, I've slowly moved away from this presumption that the violence is perpetrated predominantly or largely by men to the harm, the physical harm, is more generally experienced by women than men.
Absolutely.
And I think that informs, presumptions about coercive activities, not allowing persons to leave their homes, not allowing them to have contact with other people. I think it's that men, by and large, are more able to affect that.
Of course.
Than women. Doesn't mean that we aren't mutually predisposed to do that.
Sure.
Although, as you know, Chris, I tend to like women far more than I like men.
And I don't dispute that. I think you and I have had that conversation a lot. I agree with you for sure. Like, and I want to say too, like, again, I've said this to you and I've said it publicly before. I adore women. I think the women are a mystery. I think they're magical in my heart, and people can disagree with this however they want. I think that women deserve to be cherished, protected, doted over, adored. That's just my opinion. People can, today progressive issue or views on this, or I don't mean to insinuate that women are incapable or weak or, need my protection. I just feel like as a man, these are part of my responsibilities as a man and a husband. People can disagree with me. That's a great thing about liberty. Whether or not your opinion stinks, you still get to have it. You still get to state it. And I would agree.
Incidentally, Chris, I just want to say that I'm more terrified than anything else about women. Always have been.
Yeah. So I want to say too that yes, of course, and no one ever gets any resistance or pushback from me about the fact that regarding severe physical consequences or injury or even death, women absolutely outpace men as victims or potential victims and who are harmed more severely in these cases. I think that is a mistake, though, and sometimes people become what I call cognitively lazy because again, it points back to landing right there like that. Hell yeah, I agree with that. And the presumption moving forward is that like, okay, well, in that case, we need to put things in place that protect women. And I say 100% that I agree. However, you can't do that at the cost of excluding protections for other victims of domestic violence as well.
Yeah.
It has to be equal. And people say, well, women die more than men when it comes to DV. And I say, you're not wrong, but you have to play the tape out further than that. We have to broaden our scope of view on that and understand that men are impacted by DV in different ways and even including death, maybe not at the hands of their female partners, but suffering from different consequences. Like people laugh when I say this, but socially outcast and social consequences for men are severe and they always have been. Socially, a man who has been even alleged to be abusive or severely abusive to beating their wives is socially outcast. Like people, I think largely, and sometimes I could be wrong, but I feel like there's this idea held by some that a guy alleged to have beaten his wife or abuses his wife, that men secretly behind closed doors are like high-fiving him like, yeah, put her in her place, which is couldn't be further from the truth. Couldn't be further from the truth. The men that I know and that I choose to call my friends do not celebrate or prop up behavior like this. In fact, we look at people who abuse women or vulnerable people, women and children at all, as like kind of pretty much like the scum of the earth. The places that I've been, these people do not have a very good time in life in their experiences. And I'm talking about prison and jail. And those sentiments include the men that I know on the outside, but we don't see the same things happening to men who are accused or convicted of these things at the same rates as we do on the inside. But the social isolation, you lose your job a lot of the time because you're required to be at court hearings and you're also required to be at different classes. Sometimes you can manage that stuff, but these classes cost money. You most of the time are going to, even while it's being sorted out, if there's a criminal element attached to this, like say the man has been charged or husband's been charged, you're going to have a no contact order. And most of the time, that means that you're going to have to be the one that leaves the home. So the children stay and the wife stays. And that's where the parental alienation part starts because you not only will have you might as well have a restraining order against you and the children and your partner because you're not going to be able to facilitate visitation with your children without including this person in it, unless you go to court and get it modified. But anyway, it's one of the reasons men are 70% more likely to become homeless. It's one of the reasons that among those homeless men, that we're 75% more likely to commit suicide and have substance abuse disorder issues and clinical depression as compared to women. And what people are often surprised by, and I've talked to you about this, and I've heard the argument that it's only due to access, but that in multiple studies, I won't reference them all because I don't know that all the data represents in the same way, but pretty overwhelmingly the data suggests or points to anyway that child abuse in the home is suffered at the hands of the mother more significantly, much more significantly, in fact, than it is at the hands of the father. And when people make, yeah, and I can get it that there's an access issue. However, you got to consider that in the spectrum of visitation between both parents, still, let's take a 50-50 parenting arrangement where 50% they're with dad, 50% they're with mom. Still, in those instances, the child report or child abuse reports or data still overwhelmingly represent mothers in that situation. So I don't know that necessarily we can universally use the argument about access, and that's not to pick a side. I just wanted to kind of bolster or buttress the conversation about DV, false allegations, the implications, the objective reality about DV and what the most common form is, and get your idea about, or ideas maybe, about possible ways that even on the defense side, we can arm ourselves with better information about DV and how we can help the state and ourselves better identify DV and move forward with solutions for services, if at all that's even warranted.
So I do want to indicate that I'll be interested in looking at the studies you're talking about, which show that in a 50-50 arrangement, the it is overwhelmingly shows that the mothers or women do that more than the men do. I'm skeptical of that, but I'm willing to be taught.
Sure.
You know, I don't like to be taught very much, certainly not by you, but so I'm curious. This has gone on. I think we've managed to put, if the whole nation were watching, we've managed to put 90% of them to sleep. What are you contemplating? A lot of things have come up and been talked about by us too, that really lead off into lots of other interesting conversations that might include other people.
Yeah.
Maybe doesn't include me. But what do you see happening? First of all, do you want to proceed further with this today?
Sure, yeah, sure. I don't mind.
Okay.
So I wish that I had all the answers, but what I have actually working in my life behind the scenes, I guess to do with OPD and the work that I do, is I've been in conversations with DV experts, really progressive and who have been in that sphere for 30 plus years, almost 4 years. And the idea is to put together trainings to start the conversation about, hey, I know that this is a really polarizing topic and people have a lot of really big feelings about this issue. But let's take a look at some of this stuff. So I knew that myself, I'm not an expert. I know quite a bit about it. However, I don't have the credentialing. I'm not white and I have a criminal background. And like I said, I've been convicted of domestic violence, albeit unjustifiably, but convicted nonetheless. So I don't know. Well, I do know, like, I can tell when I start talking about this to people, they're like, they may think, oh, we know a little bit about this, but largely I think you're probably full of shit. And I completely disagree with most of what you say. So with that in mind, recognizing that, I went and I found an expert, and it just so happens to be, and I didn't know this before, two things. One, that this expert was the person that I really enjoyed. I think he might have been in this session in DC on the domestic violence session. You're sitting pretty close to us. So that speaker, the white, well, there was the white guy, he's the expert, and then the lived experience guy, who I think was trained by John Hamel, and then I think it was an attorney. I can't remember her name, but I think it was an attorney. But I really liked what he said, and a lot of the stuff that I say about DV, I learned from him and this PASK website. It's P.A.S.K. If you just type in PASK, the partner abuse. Why don't I just look it up? Let me see. But anyway, I didn't know that he, in fact, was instrumental in building that website and curating what is now and has been for a long time the largest body of study and data on domestic violence in the world. Nobody else has done it. Feminists didn't do it. States didn't do it. Him and a bunch of doctorates from around the world did it. Let me see.
So what you're talking about now suggests that you're thinking that you want at least one of the preceding conversations to be specifically about DV.
I think that it has to be. I think that it
Okay.
has to be. And what I was going to say about John is that like I said, I recognize that all the stuff I said about myself, I needed credibility, which I didn't have. Right? I might get a few people to listen to me, but I'm not quote unquote verified and certified expert. John is. He is not only an expert and he presents on the topic of DV, but he also is a domestic violence perpetrator trainer, and he's been doing that for a long time. Um, but a lot of the statistics or the data that I quote, I learned from him and the website. I don't know why it's not coming up.
So you're thinking of having him on one of your podcasts?
I do eventually. I haven't asked him yet, but what I have done is I've connected him with OPD, and the hope is, partner abuse state of knowledge. So if you were to Google domestic violence research.org, you would see, I don't know if you can see this.
It's just a bright light.
Yeah.
Nah.
Anyway, I'll, I would put it in the chat, but I'll email it to you. But it's over.
So keep in mind, you keep saying OPD. I'm not sure anybody knows what OPD.
Oh, Office of Public Defense. So,
They're the people who pay us.
yeah, there's people who pay us. Yeah, exactly. So I've reached out to John and I've had conversations, really good conversations with John. Like I said, a lot of the information I got from John and the website, I actually had him recently review some material that I put together for a session that I plan to present on DV. Hopefully sometime next year, we'll see how it goes. But he gave it the all thumbs up, which was really encouraging for me. You asked me what I see as a pathway moving forward, and like I say, I think that changing the definition in people's minds about what domestic violence actually is, and how we can better identify outside of just looking at the investigation notes and saying mom alleged DV or the investigator suspects DV and then just moving forward that full send. And I don't know, how do we make that happen? Do we bring in experts? Yes. I say we bring in experts. I say that if in fact, and this has to be an expert that's not, this is a challenge because I would prefer that it not be an expert that is DCYF approved and contracted, right? It would have to be an independent expert, not affiliated with OPD or DCYF, in my opinion, to hopefully achieve the most objective assessment on whether or not DV exists.
Okay. So it sounds like you're going to be trying to get him maybe to be involved in one of your podcasts. I'd like to suggest, though, maybe we need to do this when we're out on or not being viewed by 90 million people.
Yeah, I wish.
But I think we should try and get the woman who co-wrote the law review article on.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I can reach out to her and see.
I've had conversations with her.
Okay.
Not about this,
Yeah.
but about that article, and
Yeah.
I think she'd be great.
I do too. And I think it would tie up very nicely into that topic. And we don't have to continue down that road. I just wanted to lay out a bit of my history with it and kind of explain to people why I feel as strongly as I do, and I don't want anyone to have an understanding that I'm making an argument that in any of these cases that DV doesn't exist, and that in any of these cases that the allegations against the male partner or the female partner aren't completely accurate, or at least mostly accurate. I don't make that assumption. What my request would be is that we just don't use general blanket presumptions about domestic violence and move forward in that manner, because that's not justice. I don't think that's equitable.
So I'm sure everybody wants us to go on with this for another 4 or 5 hours. I'm thinking I'm thinking of eating sometime soon.
What? You need to eat? Are you getting? Oh, I see. Oh, you getting tired, little guy? You need
What? Whoa, whoa,
to.
whoa. So, uh, I am doing a lot of working out and working on
I,
weights.
I heard
I'm
about
soon going to
that.
be every bit as tough and big as you are.
I heard about that. I
Yeah,
heard about that.
yeah.
So, um, I have a really important question.
Uh-oh.
Really, really important question. And I think, I mean, we could debate it, but I don't know that it needs to be like heavily debated. But I need a statement and some proof from you that that Sweet Arts, what is that? The chocolate place?
Are we going to do an advertisement now?
I just need
I
you
would
to,
love to do that.
I need you
Sweet
to,
Arts.
I need you to,
Sweetarts.
yeah.
Sweet Arts. It is. This isn't a controversy anymore, is it? It is the best chocolate
Yeah,
in town.
it is pretty good. And I gotta say, man, I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't even know it was there. I don't know.
That's why you have me.
Yeah, and well, the embarrassing part is that it's been there for so long.
Yeah, yeah, I
For
really
so
have.
long. And realistically, I've probably walked past that place hundreds of times,
Yeah.
easily. But no, I think hands down, like I can't think of, and I've had I can't say all, but a lot of other dessert places in town, candies, pastries, donuts, stuff like that. I've had quite a few of them. And I don't think that any of them measure up quite yet. Although I don't know, man. I don't know that they're better than Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory. I don't know.
Oh, that's not even a close call. We had that. You took me there. That's in Oregon. That's not even in Washington. But you took me there when we went to the conference, and we tried that. And you came back and tried Sweetheart stuff and told me that you thought that was better. Now you're wavering.
I might have said that.
I
I might
can't
have said
trust
that.
you.
Well, I might have low blood sugar. That affects the things that I say. So, do you know who Mike Tyson is?
Is he? And he's still fighting.
Yeah. So he had a fight last night.
Was it last night?
Yeah, he fought this 27-year-old YouTuber turned boxer. Um, and I don't know. I don't know that it was fun to watch. If people are a fan of Mike Tyson and they have, they hold him in any regard, they remember the form of champion that he was when he was 18 through most of his 20s before, Custom Auto died and kind of went downhill dealing with Don King. But what I watched last night was more of an exhibition. It wasn't an actual like fight. It was kind of like a sparring session, which I appreciated because it would have been terrible to see Mike Tyson at 58 years old just go out there and get laid out by, some kid, and I think it would have been crappy.
So they didn't really fight.
I mean, they went in there, they hit each other for sure, but it wasn't, it was pretty obvious to me that they had an agreement, that if one or the other hurt the other one, they weren't gonna like try to really like knock him out or take him out. So that would have been pretty heartbreaking for most people who are Mike Tyson fans to see. Nobody wants to see that happen to the old dude.
Well, I was never a Mike Tyson fan.
Yeah.
I was always, as are we all, Muhammad Ali fan.
Oh, of course, man. Yeah, you can't. Even Mike Tyson says in the conversation of who is the greatest of all time, hands down, Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in boxing is and as a human being, I think as well. People have their opinions and call him a draft dodger and whatever, but I don't know that any of them would have been able to stand on that kind of conviction and lose 3 years of your professional career
Right.
standing up for religious beliefs and anti-war beliefs.
Well, so, you know, unlike Mike Tyson and whoever it's fought with, when you and I face off after I've finished uh, working out, you better watch out.
I don't want, hey, look, I don't want any problems, man. I was just joking around. I don't want any problems. I know you're coming. I know you're coming for me, so I just wait. I'm just waiting.
Yeah,
Well, you did say that you were hungry, and I know it's probably snack time in your house.
snacks. It's what, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or has this just been going on for so
12,
long that I'm bored to tears?
it's 12:30. Hey, you know that a lot of podcasts go like between 3 to 4 hours?
Really?
Yeah.
People just pop in and out listening to
No.
it. And,
Oh, I've listened to, like, I used to listen when I was doing like more physical work. Um, I would listen to podcasts, put one on, listen to it for 3 hours, take lunch break, listen to another podcast while I work. It's how a lot of people get their news these days too.
well, yeah, who wants to get news nowadays, But so that suggests if you're doing that, that your life is really boring. But I happen to know your wife, who, frankly, I don't understand why she puts up with you, but um, she's not boring.
I think well, I've thought about this too, and I think that it's kind of like one of those things that like you're closer to where you're going than to turn around than where you started from. You know what I mean? So she's been with me so long, she's like, "Hell."
I wouldn't go there if I were you, Chris.
She's like, well, I got this one trained, so might as well.
Trained. Oh,
Yeah.
oh God, I don't need to have a fight with you. I'm going to let her handle you.
She's my biggest cheerleader. I think she's amazing. I'm a pretty fortunate guy. We've been through a lot together, man, and a lot of
Yep.
stuff that you know, I mean, I'm sure people have gone through worse, but I have a belief in my heart that our story was written a certain way for a specific purpose, and that God circles certain things on the map for people, just to give them an opportunity to grow or shrink. But
Yeah, your lives have been truly interesting, scary, certainly at sometimes.
sure.
You know, I I'm baffled at the idea of living such an interesting life. My own life has managed to be profoundly boring.
You know, and I appreciate you saying that. Um, and I've thought about it. You have your mind goes on little trips when you think about your life and your experiences. And I wonder too, like, man, what would have happened if, if this didn't happen to me, or if I didn't make this choice, or etc. And immediately the place my head always goes to is like, wow, if one of those things changed, I potentially don't have five amazing kids. Like the kids that I have, I'll probably have kids, but wouldn't have these ones, maybe not
Yeah.
these ones. And I'm like, well, shit. Yeah, some of that stuff was kind of scary and pretty hectic, but not to minimize it or, whatever, but made it through it. And I think all the better
Yeah.
for it.
Yep.
And those experiences aren't just useful for me, they're useful for other people. And that's one of the reasons why I got into this work. Outside of, like, I just don't like bullies and oppression and injustice. So, get involved, try to do some good stuff. What are you gonna eat for lunch?
None of your beeswax.
Man, come on. Have you ever been to Sandwich Odyssey? You've been to Sandwich Odyssey, haven't you?
No. I,
Really?
I was going to go there, but um, Bart,
Did he stand you up?
my sons, told me what kind of sandwiches they served, and I said, nah, I'm not that interested in those kinds. I like burgers.
I like burgers too. But I'm telling you, at Sandwich Odyssey, they have this one called a chicken stack. It's like grilled chicken chunks with melted cheese and
Wait,
onions and peppers on
are
them.
you really going to be talking to me about food when I'm wanting to go have lunch?
And the big pickle spears.
Oh, you're still going. Come on. Shut up.
I'm hungry too, so I'll let you go. Uh,
Right.
for
Maybe
what's that?
maybe we'll talk again.
Oh, we will. We'll do it again. Um, and for everybody out there watching, thank you. If you didn't do it on the way in, please think about doing it on the way out. Hit that like, subscribe, post notification bell, put that thing on all so you can stay up to date on all the cool, fun stuff we talk about here on the Bees Like That podcast. Thank you, David. It's great to see
Yeah,
you, man. And I'll talk to you soon.
good.
Bye.
Bye.